We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. This is the introduction to the Declaration of Independence. These powerful words declare that because we are all created equal in the eyes of God, we all have the unalienable right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And we, having granted authority to the government, have the right, indeed an obligation, to make the government live up to these promises. This principle of holding the government accountable will serve as the foundation for our lesson today on racial segregation in America. Welcome to Thursday's Child. I'm your host, Keisha Toni. I'm a former teacher turned constitutional lawyer, here to bring you a lesson on the law. Today, we will examine two important U.S. Supreme Court civil rights cases. The first, Plessy versus Ferguson, declared that racial segregation was constitutional and established the separate but equal doctrine. And the second, Brown versus Board of Education of Topeka, which held that the government's segregation of public schools was unconstitutional. After the 13th Amendment outlawed slavery, America entered the phase of Reconstruction. In 1868, the 14th Amendment to the Constitution gave Black people equal protection under the law. Still, many white Americans, especially those in the South, were very unhappy that people that they once enslaved were now on an equal playing field. To marginalize Black people, keep them separated from whites, and to erase the progress that Black people had made during Reconstruction, Jim Crow laws were created in the South, beginning in the late 19th century. Now, Jim Crow laws weren't enacted in the northern states, but Black people still faced discrimination in those states as well. In 1896, when the United States Supreme Court stamped a seal of approval on segregation, it was a dark time in America. In Plessy versus Ferguson, Louisiana enacted the Separate Car Act, which required separate railway cars for Blacks and whites. In 1892, Homer Plessy, who was 7/8 Caucasian, agreed to participate in a test to challenge the act. He was solicited by a group of New Orleans residents who wanted to repeal that law. The railway operator was actually cooperative because the operator thought that the law caused unnecessary costs to purchase additional railroad cars just to segregate them. Plessy, who was technically Black under Louisiana law, sat in a whites-only car of a Louisiana train. Plessy was asked to leave the whites-only car. He refused and was arrested. At the Supreme Court, Plessy argued that the Separate Car Act violated the 13th and 14th Amendments of the Constitution. Now, the Supreme Court conceded that the 14th Amendment did establish absolute equality for the races before the law, but it held that separate treatment did not necessarily imply the inferiority of Black people. The Supreme Court decided that the state law was constitutional and thus upheld state-imposed racial segregation. In a dissent, Justice John Marshall Harlan argued that the Constitution was colorblind and that all citizens have equal access to civil rights. Segregation was thus legal between 1896 and 1954 until the peak of the civil rights movement. Then came Brown versus Board of Education of Topeka. So Brown was a consolidation of cases arising in Kansas, South Carolina, Virginia, Delaware, and D.C., relating to the segregation of public schools on the basis of race. In each case, Black students were denied admission to certain public schools based on laws allowing public schools to be segregated The students argued that such segregation violated the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. The Supreme Court unanimously held that separate but equal facilities are inherently unequal and violate the Equal Protection Clause. The court explained that segregation of public education imparted a sense of inferiority that had a hugely detrimental effect on the education and personal growth of Black children. So this case overturned the Plessy versus Ferguson separate but equal doctrine. But despite the legal banishment of racial segregation, many schools are still as segregated as they were at the time of the Brown decision. Now, why is that? Well, the reasons vary, and some are benign and don't relate to racism, but some people do choose to segregate themselves from other races because of racial animus. So this outcome serves as a lesson to us that racism lies in the heart of men. It cannot be eradicated with the law. The laws are designed to protect us from the government acting out those evils upon us in a way that violates the principles from the Declaration of Independence that we discussed earlier. Thus, when we march, protest, or host civil rights events, we must remember that a solid, concrete goal to change how the law operates and is applied must always be part of the conversation. We cannot merely seek to end racism. We must instead seek to alter or destroy the laws that protect it. Martin Luther King said it best. He said, "I realize that the law cannot make an employer love me or have compassion for me. Education and religion will have to do that. But it can at least keep him from refusing to hire me because of the color of my skin." And that is what we seek to do through the law. We seek to control the external effects of internal feelings that are prejudiced, and so we must continue to struggle through legalism. He went on to say, segregation is already legally dead, but it is still factually alive. That's all for this episode of Thursday's Child. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.